Ancient Book of Yashar 14, Pharaoh Rikayon. In those days there was in the land of Shinar a wise man who had understanding in all wisdom, and of a beautiful appearance, but he was poor and indigent. His name was Rikayon, and he was hard set in support himself. And he resolved to go to Egypt, to Osiris the son of Anom king of Egypt, to show the king his wisdom, for perhaps he might find favor in his sight, to raise him up and give him sustenance. And Rikayon did so. And when Rikayon came to Egypt, he asked the inhabitants about the king, and they told him the custom of the king of Egypt, for it was then the custom of the king of Egypt that he went from his royal palace and was seen abroad only one day in the year, and after that the king would return to his palace to remain there. And on the day when the king went forth he passed judgment in the land, and every one having a suit came before the king that day to obtain his request. And when Rikayon heard of the custom in Egypt and that he could not come into the presence of the king, he grieved greatly and was very sorrowful. And in the evening Rikayon went out and found a house in ruins, formerly a bakery, and he stayed the night in bitterness of soul and pinched with hunger, and sleep was removed from his eyes. And Rikayon considered within himself what he should do in the town until the king made his appearance, and how he might support himself there. And he rose in the morning and walked about, and met in his way those who sold vegetables and various sorts of seed with which they supplied the inhabitants. And Rikayon wished to do the same in order to get a support base in the city, but he was unacquainted with the custom of the people, and he was like a blind man among them. And he went and obtained vegetables to sell them for his support, and the rabble assembled around him and ridiculed him, and stole his vegetables and left him nothing. And he rose up from there in bitterness of soul, and went sighing to the bakery where he had remained the previous night, and he slept there on the second night. And again he reasoned within himself how he could save himself from starvation, and he devised a plan of action. And he rose up in the morning and acted ingeniously, and went forth and hired strong men of the rabble, carrying their war instruments in their hands, and he led them to the top of the Egyptian mound of tombs, and he placed them there. And he commanded them, saying, "The king says, strengthen yourselves and be valiant men, and let no man be buried here until 200 in silver is collected, then the dead may be buried." The hirelings did according to the order of Rikayon to the people of Egypt the entire year. And in 8 months' time Rikayon and his men gathered great riches of silver and gold, and Rikayon took a great quantity of horses and other animals, and he hired more men, and he gave them horses, and they remained with him. And when the year came around, at the time the king went forth into the town, all the inhabitants of Egypt assembled together to speak to him about the work of Rikayon and his men. And the king went forth on the appointed day, and all the Egyptians came before him and cried out to him, saying, "May the king live forever! What are you doing here in town to your servants, not to allow a dead body to be buried until so much hard money be expended? Nothing like this has ever been done in the entire land, from the days of former kings, and yes, even from the days of Adam till now, that the dead could not be buried until collecting a set price. We know it to be the custom of kings to take a yearly tax from the living, but you not only do this, you also require the collection of a tax day by day from the dead. Now, O king, we can no more stand this. Because of it, the whole city is ruined, and you don't know about it?" And when the king heard all that they had spoken he was very wroth, and his anger burned within him at this affair, for he had known nothing of it. And the king said, "Who and where is he that dares to do this wicked thing in my land without my command? Surely you will tell me." And they told him all the works of Rikayon and his men, and the king's anger was aroused, and he ordered Rikayon and his men to be brought before him. And Rikayon took about 1,000 children, sons, and daughters, and clothed them in silk and embroidery, and he set them upon horses and sent them to the king by means of his men, and he also took a great quantity of silver and gold and precious stones, and a strong and beautiful horse, as a present for the king, with which he came before the king and bowed down to the ground before him. And the king, his servants, and all the inhabitants of Egypt wondered at the work of Rikayon, and they saw his riches and the presents that he had brought to the king. And it greatly pleased the king, and he was in awe about it. And when Rikayon sat before him, the king asked him about all his works, and Rikayon spoke all his words wisely before the king, his servants, and all the inhabitants of Egypt. And when the king heard the words of Rikayon and his wisdom, Rikayon found favor in his sight, and he met with grace and kindness in all the servants of the king and in all the inhabitants of Egypt, because of his wisdom and excellent speech. From that time they loved him exceedingly. And the king answered, saying to Rikayon, "Your name will no longer be called Rikayon. Pharaoh will be your name, since you exacted a tax from the dead," and he called his name Pharaoh. And the king and his subjects loved Rikayon for his wisdom, and they consulted with all the inhabitants of Egypt to make him prefect under the king. And all the inhabitants of Egypt and its wise men did so, and it was made a law in Egypt. And they made Rikayon Pharaoh prefect under Osiris king of Egypt, and Rikayon Pharaoh governed over Egypt, daily administering justice to the whole city. But Osiris the king would judge the people of the land one day in the year, when he went out to make his appearance. And Rikayon Pharaoh cunningly usurped the government of Egypt, and he exacted a tax from all the inhabitants of Egypt. And all the inhabitants of Egypt greatly loved Rikayon Pharaoh, and they made a decree to call every king that should reign over them and their generations in Egypt, Pharaoh. So then all the kings that reigned in Egypt from that time forward were called Pharaoh even until now.